And so I think I've learned a lot about how to balance flexibility and scale. You have to have some level of consistency and standardization in how you approach research and how you do things, but you still need to be like flexible enough to adapt to changing priorities.
Hello, Nisreen. Thank you so much for joining me on BlatzChatz. I'm excited. We used to work together at Rocket, and it's so great to see you again.
It's awesome to see you again. I'm so glad you reached out.
Sure. So I want to dive right in, and I'd like to start off with a little bit of a fun question, and that is, what's something that people don't know about you?
Ooh. Okay. So most people's first impression of me is that I'm really bookish. You can probably tell from my background. I was voted most likely to become a librarian when I was in high school, but I actually am really outdoorsy. I like being outdoors a lot. I like to hike. I like to bike. I love water sports. I have a motorcycle that I like to ride up north, and I'm learning how to ride a dirt bike on the trails as well. So I spend a lot of time just like adventuring. So, like, yes, I love my books, but I like to read them outdoors and I like to be outdoors quite a lot.
Nice. And being in Michigan, right? You take advantage of all the seasons.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, that's one of the things that's actually really nice about Michigan, but it's a very well-kept secret, so don't tell people. We like it quiet here. It's really nice in the fall, like, the colors are gorgeous, so, like, that's where I spend a lot of time hiking. Over the winter, we've got some really nice ski trails, especially if you're going up north or into the UP in Canada, and then it's also really beautiful in the summers too. It's very temperate, so it's never, like, too hot, you know what I mean? And it's, like, perfect picnic weather.
Nice. Very nice. What was your journey, Nisreen, into UX?
Yeah, so I honestly, like most people, I think, did not really know that UX was a discipline when I went to college. I actually started off as a business major at the University of Michigan, and I took a film class just for fun and then just fell in love with it. So decided to go into like entertainment marketing. And as I was looking for jobs in that space, most of the jobs that I was finding that really fit my skill set at the time were market research jobs or CX strategy type roles. And so that's where I interned and how I started like building up my work experience. And while working at MRM McKean for a summer in downtown Birmingham, I was working on a project that was in collaboration with their UX design and research team. And I found it fascinating in their approach because a lot of the work I was doing was looking at the brand I was supporting, what sort of trends are coming up 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line. How can we evolve? How can we transform? Which is exciting stuff, don't get me wrong. But I felt like I wasn't doing anything that's going to have an immediate impact, especially because I was there for a summer. I'm going to deliver this stuff and it might just be forgotten and left on the shelf. And when I saw how the UX process worked and how quick and fast paced it was, and how flexible and adaptable people were and open to changing their plans and their designs according to what we learned, that really appealed to me. That idea that we're like constantly optimizing and working to get better, that resilient culture and push to be better and better is just really appealing to me. And I wanted to be a part of a team that had that sort of culture and that attitude and the work process to match that. So I decided to explore what it would look like to shift my career a little bit. And I learned that University of Michigan, which I was attending for undergrad, also had a graduate program in human computer interaction, which is just academic term for UX research and design. And applications were due in a week from when I had made the decision that I wanted to go. And so I took the GRE and submitted my application to University of Michigan and a couple of other schools. They offered me a generous scholarship and off I went. And the rest is really history. I started there and I worked part-time at Ford while going to grad school. And that was really great too, because I was able to apply everything I was learning, like the theory I was learning into the classroom, into my work right away. And so I very early in my career, I understood the limitations of what we were learning as the ideal process and how to apply it in a more corporate environment and really experiment with that. They bring that perspective back to class to really learn from my classmates and my teachers how I could lean into that more. So it was kind of like having a whole group of mentors and a sounding board around me as I was really early in my UX career. Um, when I went to Rocket Mortgage, that's where I started to specialize in research specifically. because when I was hired in, we didn't actually have a UX research team. And when our new VP of design came in, he asked us, what are we missing? What can we do better? And I raised my hand and we're not doing really good research. If we do research, it's sometimes after design is shipped, then we have to go back to dev and be like, hey, wait, let's take a step back. Let's fix some of these usability problems. And you lose a lot of credibility as a design team that way. And so he really took a chance on me, and I had a chance to build up that UX research team from scratch and really dive deep into research as a discipline.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that story. You mentioned earlier that you had some experience with market research, and I wanted to see your perspective. What are some similarities and differences between market research and UX research?
I'm actually going to pull from more recent experience to answer that question, because as an intern, you're only exposed to so much. But I also had the opportunity when I was at Rocket Mortgage to lead not just our UX research team, but also our voice of the customer team and our market research team. And I think market research is a really broad discipline. It can encompass a lot of different things. There's marketing research where you're supporting creative development and advertising and measuring your brand and looking at your brand strategy and stuff like that. There's product market research where you're really thinking about how a product operates within the marketplace. Is it differentiated? Is it going to drive revenue for our business? What's our go-to-market strategy? How do we position this in a way that's attractive to customers? And then there's also competitive intelligence, market sizing, exploring like new market opportunities like white space. Most of my experience has been specifically in the product market research space. And I think there's a lot of overlap between product market research and quantitative UX research, which is also growing as its own independent discipline, in that a lot of the methods are the same, right? I think what really distinguishes market research from UX research is not the methodology. It's not even the approach or the pacing. Most of all, it's the research questions that we're answering. If I am a product market researcher, the research questions I'm answering is, how will this product perform in market? What value proposition resonates the most with our customers? If I'm a UX researcher, I'm thinking about, what's the customer need? How severe is the customer need? What's the customer journey and how can we address that? And obviously there's overlap there. And I think that overlap is actually where the magic happens. When we're able to bring those insights together and layer them on top of each other, we get to another layer of depth and understanding of our customers in the market and what's going to perform best, because it addresses a customer need in a way that the market doesn't provide today. And so that's where I really think that we have a great opportunity to collaborate. The trouble is, in a lot of organizations, these research teams are very, very siloed, right? It's actually a rarity to have them all report up to one leader or even live in the same part of the organization. So we have to invest a lot in, building those partnerships and understanding each other and working through things. And sometimes we don't speak the same language. We use different terms to mean the same thing. So it's hard at first to build that relationship, but the more you invest the time in it, the more you're going to start reaping the rewards.
I can totally remember being on the team of market and design researchers or UX researchers, and we were speaking the same language with different terms, and there was definitely misunderstandings to iron out, like you said, to build those relationships.
That's also a way that you can build trust with each other, though. When you guys realize that and come over that miscommunication, you get out of the other side. And it will solidifies the relationship, because you guys both are realizing at the same time, oh, we're not really that different.
Very true. Very true. So, Nisreen, what's on your mind these days?
But when it comes to research, I think it's about the research maturity journey. I think there is a time when we talked a lot about the design maturity journey, and you have a lot of maturity models that reflect that. I don't think we're talking enough as a research, like thought leadership group, about what that maturity journey looks like for research in particular, because there's different flags, there's different signals, there's different things that you need to invest in to mature a research team. There's overlap with design. When I think about it, I'm thinking about things like research operations. Research can be really, really slow when you don't have the operations in place to facilitate quality recruitment, for example, or the research tooling landscape is really, really fragmented. and can be really expensive if you're not navigating it appropriately. So to be really efficient with your budget, it's helpful to have a leader who's really well versed in operations, or to even have a research operations lead or team that you're coordinating with to really navigate those relationships and build up a toolbox that's effective for the sort of research that your team is doing. So I feel like operations is a key one. I think another one is a lot of researchers talk about, we want to be strategic, we want to be strategic, we want to be strategic. But we get stuck in what I call the evaluative vortex, where you're not doing a lot of generative work. So to reduce risk in launching new products or launching optimization, you're doing a ton of usability testing, because that's all that you can do to reduce the level of risk, because you don't have other knowledge to inform whether or not you're making the right design decisions. And especially if you're working on a product where any sort of change can have a massive impact on your company's bottom line, that becomes really problematic, right? Because everybody wants to reduce that risk. You kind of get stuck in that space. I think in order to move out of that space, you need to work really effectively with your partners to decide what is our risk tolerance as an organization, and where are we comfortable with taking on more risk versus less, so that we can move ahead in the process and do more of that foundational research that can inform things down the line. And so
Yeah.
that's something else that I think is part of the research maturity journey as well, is investing the time and becoming more up funnel.
Yeah, I think that is quite tricky because I think a lot of organizations, you're right, start with that evaluative testing, usability
Sure.
testing, and it's challenging to show the value of actually doing that generative research, getting ahead of those product decisions and showing how to mitigate risk. You mentioned that, but how do you show the value of that if you don't actually have the opportunity or the time to do that generative research?
I think about it in two different ways, right? One is that you can do it through the work. The way that it shows up through the work is integrating more exploratory questions into the evaluative research that you're doing, so that you're not just evaluating the design and its usability and its efficacy in solving a customer problem, but you're also starting to evaluate whether that problem exists at all. Maybe it's not ideal because you're not doing a full IDI or more in depth qualitative study that you want to do to inform that, but it gives you a couple of data points to rely on, so that when you're delivering your results, if you're seeing conflicts, you can raise that. And we could have found this out sooner before investing time in design if we were involved more upfront. Look, this is how I would have done it differently. Why don't we pilot that next time? So it's a good way of showing the value of that data in a very specific use case. Another way that you can look at it too is just in conversations we're having around how we want to design against something, how we want to solve against something. I find a lot of times we question ourselves a lot as a design team. Is this the best way? We generate a lot of ideas. It's part of the design process, right? To think about all of the different ways that we can solve a particular problem. And a lot of times we waste a lot of time talking in circles about what the best approach is before finally aligning on one and getting it to a good place for testing. So as those sort of circular conversations are happening, something I like to do is call out, hey, if we did some upfront research now, we can inform the best direction. And sometimes, depending on how timelines are malleable, maybe the design team can focus on something where there's a little bit more certainty or focus on what the right solution would be. And then we can people working on the design for the thing we're less certain about, invest some time in research, and then inform the design process that way. So I've also found that to be really effective in being, hey, we clearly have a lack of alignment about which direction we want to go in. This is just taking more and more time. In fact, research can speed up this process versus slow it down. So that also goes against the common myth that research is a blocker, research is slow. By driving alignment and facilitating decision making, research can actually speed things rather than slow things down.
Yes, I totally agree. We have the opportunity to really inform direction and say, this is the user need.
Yeah.
And this is the problem we need to solve, right? And give that to the team that kind of North Star to
Mhm.
make those design decisions and not be, like you mentioned, swirling around trying to decide which solution is best. So, Nisreen, we're talking about UX maturity. What wish people knew about UX or UX research? when it comes to your job? What do you wish they understood better?
I think it's like how highly contextual it is. It's not just about design principles or design best practices, although those are really, really important. I think it's understanding how people are interacting with technologies in their daily lives. That's where the magic is. And especially post pandemic, I think a lot of teams have devoted more and more time into like remote research. It's faster, it's easier, it's cheaper a lot of the time. But we kind of like lose understanding how people are interacting with things in the moment. Like if I'm shopping on Amazon, for example, I'm really like sitting down, walking through a flow, thinking about it kind of like as I go along. It's usually I'm off listening to something my husband's saying or watching my son play in the background. So just understanding where people are like mentally in their lives and how that's driving decision making as they interact with the flow. I think that's something that not just non UX people recognize, but sometimes even we as a discipline can sometimes.
Yeah, and how small our product is in their world and their ecosystem.
Exactly. There's like such a large journey that's often associated with any particular like app or product. And that app or product is one part of that greater journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that teams are becoming more open to exploring that external world besides the product or service that your company is offering?
I think it really depends on what company you're supporting and what their priorities are, right? If your business priorities are really focused on things like conversion and moving through an application flow, you're going to be considering how you research that very differently than something that's more like discovery based, right? And so I think it really depends on the interaction patterns that exist with that product and the business priorities that are driving that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Thinking about, again, as we've kind of talked about some similar themes and maturity and whatnot, I think sometimes a lower sign of maturity is the researcher goes off, does the work, and brings the report back and says, voila, here it is. Versus having your partners, product partners, designers, even tech participate with you, not
Mhm.
the research, but observe and help plan and review your research plan and whatnot. Their buy-in sooner and their interest in the research stronger. What tactics do you recommend to bring those partners into the process and to bring them along?
I really feel like that partnership is crucial for a research project to be successful. I think that if you're delivering results without that partnership up front, a lot of times those results are not going to land, no matter how strongly based they are in evidence and data, because they haven't been part of that journey and seen the story evolve along with you. And as a researcher, that can be really frustrating, right? I learned all this like exciting new stuff. This is going to completely change how we approach things. And then everyone's like, wait, 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 back up a second. I need to follow your logic, right? The ways I've looked at bringing people in before is I lean really heavily into workshopping. For example, when a product management team develops their roadmap, we should be building research roadmaps in parallel because by anticipating what's coming next, tying our research studies to business goals that we're driving against, like in a quarter, in a year, and making sure that everything has that through line, we're really proving out our ROI and showing that we're in lockstep with our product partners. And it makes our research better. It means that we're more heavily focused on the things that our business cares about. And we can bring the business need and the user need together to really deliver something that's going to be impactful for both the customer and the business. So whenever those sort of planning sessions happen, whether they're quarterly, whether they're in a more agile process, what have you, I think research has to be in that room. If you've got a good knowledge base already, informing what the product roadmap looks like, and also based on how that's developing, think about the kind of research that we need to do to execute against that product roadmap. This is also to your earlier question about how to be more strategic and proactive. That is also the perfect opportunity to start pitching research opportunities early on and securing buy-in for doing more like generative or foundational work up front so it doesn't come as a surprise or it's impeding something that's already been decided or so I think there's a lot of advantage of showing up in the planning stage before decisions have really been made. When it comes to actually kicking off a research project, something else I think is really important is when you're refining a research question and also writing out the hypotheses that you're testing against. those hypotheses should not just be driven by context of what assumptions are people making? What are they biased in favor of? Do they have a pet project? Is something like an idea that they really want to see successful for whatever reason? Are there business incentives, right? Or organizational incentives that means they really want something to test well? That's not a bad thing. We all have a role to play in the organization, and everyone's incentivized in different ways to deliver on different objectives in a company. That's fine. But as a researcher, it's important to recognize when those biases exist and to document those assumptions and to bring them up in a kickoff in a really constructive way. Hey, I heard you say that XYZ is really important to our customers, so we should deliver this solution. I want to explore that a little bit more. I wonder if this other thing is also important or more important, or how these other things can affect that, what environmental factors exist. Why don't we integrate that into this research study and consider it? And you might get some pushback, but by being open and honest about what you're looking to explore and how it directly ties to something that the stakeholder cares about, you're including them in the process while preserving the rigor of your work. And then when it comes to actually like executing to your point, like there's a lot of power in folks observing. We used to have an observation calendar at Rocket. We have one at PayPal too, where anyone can just come in, join a moderated research session, listen in, and also have a debrief afterwards. And I think I'm sure they heard the same things I did. But everyone comes out of an interview or any other sort of moderated research session with different takeaways based on what they're listening for. I think it's really valuable to have that conversation with stakeholders to understand where their heads at and coming together to align on where are we going to take that data from there. But okay, so there's two other ways I think that we can collaborate with our stakeholders. So the next one is I do think the researcher should own analyzing and synthesizing the raw data into be specialize in. But I do think it's really helpful to then take those themes to your stakeholders and co-create the recommendations together. It's kind of like a research-driven ideation session, so to speak, right? Where you're like, hey, these are the common themes I've found. Let's talk about ways that we can integrate this into the design. I think a lot of times when we miss that step, our recommendations are either too broad for our team to really understand how to apply them into their own work, or they're specific, but not really hitting the mark of where our stakeholders want to take things. And there's a little bit of latitude there. We can stay honest to the research, but implement like different ideas than maybe we as a researcher can think of. And we have to respect the fact that our product managers and our designers may have different ideas about how to bring these insights to life. So I think it's really crucial that they're involved in part of building out those recommendations. And in doing that, you're also ensuring that everyone is aligned on the recommended solution so that when it does go to a design review or to leadership, or if it's challenged in any way down the line, you have allies. It's not just you saying, hey, this is what the research showed. Hey, we came together. We decided this is the best path forward. We all believe in this. Here's the research to support it. Here is the design justification, right? The design principles we're relying on to inform this. This is how we think it's going to affect the business. It's probably how your product managers are going to support it. So getting the power of all those three perspectives together is going to help you build the best solution.
Yeah, that's an interesting take that I don't think a lot of researchers do, building the recommendations with their team. They usually include that in their summary report, right? So I like that perspective because then you can have some conversations, get more context and knowledge with your stakeholders around oh, I didn't realize that was key to you. Okay, so that's where we need to focus those conversations we had in those ideation sessions.
At the end of the day, generally, you don't have a one-to-one relationship between research and design or research and PM. There's going to be more designers and more product managers than there are researchers. We tend to operate more horizontally over a broader scope of work. That means their depth of knowledge into specific flows and designs and how they're performing can be greater than the researchers. So it's also really helpful for the researcher to learn a little bit more about that depth and how things apply, because it's impossible when you've got that broader scope of work to go as deep on the design specifically. You're specializing in the user need, you're specializing in the data. And so it's really helpful to have that perspective for sure.
So Nisreen, how has your point of view of the discipline of user experience changed through the years, if at all?
When I was at Ford, I was a part of a relatively small, very agile, very flexible product team. A lot of the work I did was driven by me in collaboration with my partners. I was the one who was identifying research opportunities and bringing them forward. As I started working in larger and larger organizations and moving into leadership, it's very difficult to operate in that way at scale. And so I think I've learned a lot about how to balance flexibility and scale. You have to have some level of consistency and standardization in how you approach research and how you do things, but you still need to be like flexible enough to adapt to changing priorities. And that's something else I've learned a lot is I think it's something that a lot of companies struggle with is how to prioritize effectively and how to maintain those priorities. Because as a business, your needs are going to be continuously changing. And as a research team, you need to constantly adapt to that while still preserving some consistency in our process and how we do things so that we have a sustainable approach to work. So I think that balance is something I've been thinking about a lot. And it's something that is becoming more and more apparent as like more and more UX teams are growing and maturing in industries where maybe they historically have not. In the time since I've left Ford, and their design team has grown quite a bit, right? And become much more fundamental business partners versus just being one designer and a little product team and this little part department. And so that's something we all have to think about is how do we scale and how do we do so with enough flexibility to continue doing our job well?
Yes. So where has that gone through the years? Have you scaled more? Have you been more flexible, less flexible? How has that changed?
It depends on like the culture of the organization. So at
Yeah.
Rocket, we've definitely leaned more heavily, I think, on like flexibility versus consistency or standardization. Business priorities were changing so regularly, it was just a necessity. But there's certain things that we preserved, right? Now at PayPal, we have a little bit more structure because the research team has been around for a lot longer than it was when I was at Rocket. I had started that. So it was only 2, 3 years old by the time I even left Rocket. It's dependent on the culture of the organization. And that's kind of the fun part of leadership is being able to suss that out and understand the culture of your organization and how people interact with each other, what their priorities are, and how decisions get made and how work gets done. And then being able to both integrate into that so that you can be a part of that process and part of that greater organization, but also finding the places where you need to push back and change things and we have to do things differently. This isn't a point of view that's necessarily changed over the years, but something that I'm just like thinking about more and more because it's becoming more relevant as I get more exposed to larger organizations.
Yeah. So I know that you have been an IC, an individual contributor, and you're now a leader. What would you say if you have a perspective of the pros and cons of each of those types of roles?
I think the advantage of being an IC is you have an opportunity to go so deep in the work. The changes that are made based on the research are truly coming from you, and that can be really meaningful, right? Especially when you see like a large customer impact, especially if you're continuously doing research in a particular space or a particular product, or even a customer panel that you're touching again and again seeing their lives get better because of the changes that you implemented, because of the research you brought forward, that is just powerful stuff. It's a really strong motivator. When it comes to leadership, the impact you have looks different. It's more of an organizational impact, a culture impact. It's more about crafting an environment where your team can be successful versus being responsible for the success yourself, so to speak. And so you're just working at a level of breadth where you're not as closely tied to the specific insights that are being delivered, but you're helping to facilitate that and make it happen in an org that may not be perfectly suited for it yet and working to change things. You can have a very meaningful impact as a leader, but you don't always see it at the end of a particular research project. There's no easy beginning and end to it. I knew pretty early on that I wanted to move into leadership because I'm really fascinated by the way that organizations work. And I'm really passionate about supporting other people. Even as an IC, I created the first community of practice around design and research at Ford and really built that out and built a playbook and stuff like that. So I really believe in investing in others, mentoring others, growing others, developing others. And you're just positioned to do, and you can definitely do that as an IC for sure. We are positioned to do that in different ways as a leader. I've been responsible for creating new career ladders that support folks in advancing their careers, whether they want to be an ICE. I've supported folks in developing career growth plans and really helped like them grow. I've had folks go from intern to senior during my tenure at a company. That's also impactful and meaningful to see somebody truly grow to that extent in a short amount of time because you've invested in them and they've responded to that. So it's also just being able to create structures that help everybody reach their full potential. That's really what's driven me from very early on in my career.
Yeah, and that's a challenge because people have things going on in their lives and
Yes.
they're motivated by different things. So helping them reach their goals must be very challenging when multiple people, multiple things.
Yeah. And coming back to our conversation on research maturity too, I believe in order to mature a research team, you have to have a really clear purpose and vision in place that everyone's working towards. And there are going to be times where that purpose and vision resonates with some people and not everyone. So working with folks to find purpose within that vision and supporting it in a way that plays to their skills and their interests is something that's also really interesting and I think can be done in most cases. But you have to invest the time in understanding what your team wants, what they're looking for, who they want to be, how they want to contribute, creating a space for them to play within that.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, the thing that everybody's talking about, and that is the integration of UX research and AI. What are your thoughts on that?
So this is a pretty broad thing. So I'm going to start with AI technologies and how research can support developing AI product. It's a pretty huge research opportunity. We saw this with the rise of VR, mixed reality, or smart glasses. These are all things that are new technologies that require new interaction patterns, and AI is no different. But like all technologies, it's like really important to recognize what its limitations are and make those limitations visible to the end user. I think design and research actually have a really strong role to play in that as we deliver more and more AI products to market. How do we make AI decision making more visible to the end user so that we can build trust in these technologies and build engagement over time? That's a really thorny UX problem that I think is going to be really interesting to see how that evolves over the years as we continue to invest in building out that technology and accordingly. I saw this when I was in IC, one of the products I worked on was actually an algorithm. And what I did is I did a lot of field research to determine how we can weigh variables within that algorithm. And it was a black box algorithm, so we weren't always sure what the output would be. But that was one of the things we really struggled with is the end user interacting with this algorithm would be given a decision, the output, and not recognize how it came to that decision. How can we build more affordances into the UI to demonstrate that? And we're just seeing the same thing with AI. And so it's just a continuous evolution as we continue to bring new products to market. When it comes to AI and research and how we as researchers can leverage AI technologies in our own work, the jury's still out personally. I've seen ways where I've found it to be useful in building out decks. Just sometimes you get in your head and you're using the same jargony language. And I'm like, I know this isn't going to land. How do I make this simple? ChatGPT is really good at simplifying language, summarizing information, etc. Once you have the final deliverable in place, you finished your analysis, super useful. When we're talking about like AI helping in identifying themes and affinity mapping or actually running interviews on your behalf, I think that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. I've seen those technologies out there in the world, and I personally have not had enough experience working with them to say, yes, this works or no, it doesn't. I think it's something that we all should do our due diligence to continue exploring and testing the limits of, but not something we should necessarily be reliant on until we learn more. I think this also like begs the question, say these AI technologies are good enough to run interviews on our behalf and do all of the synthesis and all that. Where does that leave us? You just have to think about the hardest parts of the research process. The hardest parts of the research process was never running the research. Never. It's always framing the study, gathering requirements from stakeholders, integrating their assumptions and biases into our work. When delivering the insights, making sure we're doing so in a way that ties back to the business problem as well as the user problem. acting as consultants and activating those insights across the organization. That's the value that we provide. And that is something that AI is ever going to be able to do because you have to have the soft skills of understanding where your organization is at and where your stakeholders at and what your goals are and balancing those priorities against each other, facilitating trade-off discussions. That is something that is very human in my mind. And so I would really like for people who are nervous about I would recommend that you think about all the things that we can do that make us unique and continue to build those skills. Because let's be honest, those are the hardest part of the research process anyway.
Thinking about working on a project end to end, we take for granted all of that stakeholder management, gathering the context just to build out a research plan. Like you said, those biases and assumptions and navigating those and making sure we're addressing their ask without
Mhm.
botching the whole study. So thinking about that end-to-end process and what actually it entails, you're correct. The actual conducting the research, quite small.
We have a lot of tools that have come to life over the years to help facilitate us that as well that are not AI driven, but change the game for us and help us move more quickly and better. So everything from interview transcription to automatic just scheduling tools. You know, when you upload your calendar, a participant uploads their calendar, you find that magic time where you both can connect.
Yeah, that's true. It used to be called technology. Now there's AI.
Yeah, my hope is that it just helps it accelerate the more manual tasks so that we can invest more time in activating our work and really making it a part of our organization's fabric, creating a shared understanding of where customers are, what their needs are, what the market opportunities are, et cetera.
Look, talking about the future a little bit, tell me, Nisreen, what do you hope that the future of user experience research is or entails?
There's this tension between like some teams where you see folks specialize more and more, and some folks where they're generalizing more and more, perhaps to reduce costs, maybe for another reason. But back in the day, everyone was kind of a generalist, so to speak. You see this sort of dynamic where we went from generalist to specialist to some people branching out to becoming generalists again. I think as we think about the future of research, I want us to all come forward, no matter whether we feel like we're specialists and generalists and truly engage and partner with each other. I think as we specialize, sometimes you see natural tensions rise between specialties. We talked about the differences and similarities between market research and UX research, for example. Teams that should be best friends sometimes aren't. But I see that happening also with design and UX research in some instances, or product and UX research. And I want to make sure that as we all continue to evolve in our discipline and become more attached to the value that we ourselves provide, that we also remember the value that everyone around us, and that at the end of the day, it's going to take all of us to deliver something that's going to be truly meaningful to our customers and also deliver business value and keep our company running. Right. And so I want to make sure that we don't get caught in this view where what I do is important and put those blinders on and forget that really the magic happens when we compromise and we talk about things about decisions on a spectrum and trade-offs versus my way or your way. I think there's just so much opportunity to go a layer deeper and be like that much better as a team, as well as like the products that we produce when we're truly partnering and empathizing with each other.
That makes complete sense. We think about, like you mentioned, very similar disciplines, but how are we collaborating well with our partners in these journeys?
Yeah, it's like easy to like get caught up in like what you need to do and what you need to deliver against and what's meaningful to you without remembering that others are incentivized by other things. Maybe your product managers are being held accountable to certain metrics and delivering against those metrics every quarter, every year. Perhaps your design partners are held accountable to a different set of standards or expectations than you are as a researcher. Recognizing that and knowing that changes how people show up at work is important so that you find a way to achieve something that everyone can truly contribute to.
I want to wrap up today with my favorite research question, which is there anything that we didn't touch upon today that you would like to chat about?
Only that, thank you for making the time to chat with me. It's always fun to talk shop. And I just hope that you continue this forum and talk to other researchers, leaders, product managers, and designers. I'm really excited to see who else comes on the show.
Great. Well, thank you so much.
Check out all my interviews with industry leaders on BlatzChatz.